She didn't know his name meant death in 12 languages. She didn't know the red dress she chose that Friday morning was a declaration of war in a world she never asked to enter. She didn't know that by noon, 3 separate kill teams would be hunting her through the frozen streets of Manhattan. All Nia Holloway knew was that the silk felt warm against her skin, and for the first time in months, she felt like herself again. That was her first mistake. Her second mistake was walking through the front door. Her third mistake was making him care. If this story satisfies your soul the way it satisfies mine, smash that like button and drop your city in the comments so I can see just how far this story travels. Now settle in. This one's going to leave marks. The alarm screamed at 5:47 a.m., and Nia Holloway slapped it dead on the second ring. She lay there in the dark of her Bed-Stuy apartment, staring at a ceiling stain shaped like a fist, and thought about the $37 in her checking account. $37.11, to be exact, because she'd checked at 2 in the morning when sleep refused to come and anxiety crawled through her chest like something with teeth. Rent was due in 6 days. Her mother's prescription refill was due in 4. Her brother Darius needed a new winter coat because the zipper on his old one had given up somewhere around Thanksgiving, and he'd been holding it closed with a binder clip for 3 weeks. $37 wasn't going to save anybody. She swung her legs off the mattress and her feet hit cold hardwood. The radiator had quit again sometime during the night, and her breath came out in thin clouds that disappeared before they reached the ceiling. January in Brooklyn didn't care about your problems. January in Brooklyn would freeze you to death and charge you rent for the privilege. The shower took 4 minutes because the hot water ran out at 3.5. She dried off with a towel that had gone stiff from too many washes and cheap detergent, and she stood in front of her closet wearing nothing but goosebumps and a scowl. That's when she saw the dress. It hung in the back, behind 2 black blazers and a gray cardigan she wore to work every single day, like a uniform nobody had issued her. The red dress. Her mother had bought it for her 23rd birthday, back before the diagnosis, back when buying something frivolous didn't feel like a crime against survival. Real silk, deep crimson, the kind of color that didn't whisper. It announced. Nia pulled it from the hanger and held it against her body in the mirror. The woman staring back at her looked tired. Dark circles sat heavy under her eyes. Her collarbone jutted out more than it should have because dinner lately had been rice and whatever protein was on sale at the bodega downstairs. But in that red silk, something shifted. Her shoulders pulled back. Her chin came up. The tired woman in the mirror suddenly looked like someone who might survive the day. "Screw it," Nia said to nobody. She put on the dress. The subway was a punishment, same as always. The F train rattled through tunnels that smelled like wet metal and old newspapers, packed tight with commuters who had perfected the art of staring at nothing. Nia stood near the doors, one hand gripping the overhead bar, the red dress hidden beneath her puffy black coat. A man in a Yankees cap kept glancing at her, and she stared him down until he found something else to look at. 8 months. That's how long she'd been working at Hanul Group's Manhattan headquarters. 8 months of answering phones, scheduling meetings, organizing files, and pretending she didn't notice the things that didn't add up, like the armed guards stationed at every floor who carried weapons too expensive for corporate security, like the private elevators that only certain men used, always after midnight, always with briefcases that seemed heavier going in than coming out. Like the way entire floors would go silent when certain visitors arrived. Men in dark suits who smelled like expensive cologne and spoke in clipped Korean that Nia couldn't understand but whose tone she could read perfectly. These were not business negotiations. These were threats delivered in silk neckties. She noticed all of it. She just couldn't afford to care. Because Hanul Group paid her $4,200 a month after taxes, which was nearly double what any other secretarial position in the city would offer. And they paid it on time, every time, directly into the account she used to cover her mother's chemotherapy at Mount Sinai. The treatments cost $3,100 a month, even with insurance, and the insurance was garbage, and without this job her mother would die. Not might die, would die. The math was that simple and that brutal. So Nia kept her eyes on her keyboard and her mouth shut, and she cashed the checks and she stayed alive. And that was the deal she'd made with herself the day she accepted the position. The elevator doors opened on the 42nd floor, and the warmth hit her like walking into someone else's life. Marble floors so polished she could see her reflection. Floor-to-ceiling windows framing Manhattan's skyline in gray winter light. the faint scent of cedar and leather that seemed built into the walls themselves. Everything about Hanuel Group's executive floor was designed to remind you that money existed in quantities you would never comprehend. Nia hung her coat in the closet behind her desk and felt the red silk settle against her skin. The dress fit her like a second pulse, tight at the waist, flowing at the knee, the kind of garment that made you stand differently, walk differently, breathe differently. "Good morning, Miss Holloway." She looked up. Jun Ho, the head of Tae Min's personal security detail, stood near the private elevator bank with his hands clasped behind his back. He was built like a compressed explosion, short, thick-necked, his suit barely containing shoulders that belonged on a linebacker. His eyes were scanning her the way they scanned everything, cataloging threat levels with mechanical precision. But today his scan paused. On the dress. Something crossed his face that Nia had never seen before. Not attraction. Something colder. Something that looked almost like alarm. "Morning, Junho," she said, settling into her chair. "Coffee's brewing. Should be ready in 5. He didn't move. His jaw worked slightly, like he was chewing on words he'd decided not to say. "Is everything okay?" she asked. "Fine," he said, but his eyes cut to the dress one more time before he turned away, and the speed of his retreat wasn't normal. Junho never rushed. Junho moved through the world like a man who'd calculated every possible outcome and found them all manageable. Whatever he'd just seen on her body had upset that calculation. Nia pushed the thought away and booted up her computer. The morning passed like every other morning, a blur of phone calls, calendar management, and emails written in Korean that she ran through translation software even though she wasn't supposed to. Not because she was spying, because understanding what was happening around her felt safer than not understanding. And in this building, safety was a currency she could never hold enough of. At 10:15, the private elevator chimed. Kang Tae-min stepped out. He was tall for a Korean man, 6'1", maybe 6'2", with shoulders that filled his charcoal suit jacket without straining it. His hair was black and cut close, swept back from a face that could have been carved from stone if stone could hold that much tension. High cheekbones, a jaw that looked like it had been set in anger and never relaxed, dark eyes that moved across any room the way searchlights move across prison yards, slow, deliberate, missing nothing. He was 38 years old and he ran a corporation worth $2.3 billion on paper. What the paper didn't show was the other empire, the one built on fear, on blood, on decades of violence that had carved the Kang family's name into the bedrock of the Korean criminal underworld like scripture carved into bone. Kang Tae-min, the White Viper, a name that made powerful men lose their appetite and dangerous men check their weapons. Nia had worked for him for 8 months, and he had spoken directly to her exactly 14 times. She knew, because she counted, not out of infatuation, but out of survival instinct. Each interaction was data. Each word he said or didn't say told her something about how visible she was to him. And in this building, visibility was either protection or a death sentence, depending on the day. "Miss Holloway." His voice was low, controlled, like a frequency designed to bypass the ear and settle directly in the chest. He spoke English with barely any accent, but there was a rhythm to it, a precision that made every word feel chosen from a list of thousands. "Good morning, Mr. Kang." She stood as he approached, which was protocol. His eyes swept down her body and back up so fast she almost missed it. But she didn't miss it, because she'd learned to watch him the way small animals watch hawks. Not with fear exactly, but with the acute awareness that comes from knowing you share space with something that could end you without effort. He stopped walking. That was unusual. Tae-min never stopped between the elevator and his office door. His mornings were choreographed with the efficiency of a man who considered wasted seconds a personal insult. He walked from point A to point B, and the world arranged itself around his trajectory. But today, he stopped, 3 feet from her desk, and looked at her. "That dress," he said. Nia's stomach tightened. "Sir? Where did you get it?" The question landed wrong. It wasn't conversational. It wasn't a compliment circling toward delivery. There was something beneath it, an urgency that didn't match the calm surface of his face. "It was a gift," she said carefully. "From my mother." His jaw flexed. A micro-movement. If she hadn't been watching so closely, she would have missed the way his back teeth clenched and released. Come to my office, he said. Now. He turned and walked through the double doors without waiting for her response. The doors closed behind him with the heavy whisper of wood against carpet, and Nia stood alone in the reception area with her heart hammering against the red silk like it was trying to escape. In 8 months, he had never invited her into his private office. In 8 months, he had never looked at her with anything other than the polished indifference of a man who had categorized her as furniture. Something was very wrong. She knocked twice and entered. His office was the size of her apartment times 3. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the Hudson River, where barges moved through gray water like slow animals. A mahogany desk sat at the center, bare except for a laptop and a single glass of water. No personal photographs. No decorations. The room looked like it belonged to someone who had removed every trace of himself from his own life. Taemin stood by the windows with his back to her, hands in his pockets, shoulders carrying a weight she could see from across the room. Close the door. She did. Sit down. She didn't. I prefer to stand, she said, and she heard the edge in her own voice and didn't try to soften it. Something about the way he'd summoned her. The urgency, the command, the absence of explanation had triggered every alarm her instincts owned. He turned from the windows. His face was different. The mask of corporate control had slipped, just slightly, and what she saw beneath it wasn't anger. It was something worse. It was dread. How long have you worked here, Miss Holloway? 8 months? And in 8 months, have you noticed anything unusual about this organization? The question was a trap, and they both knew it. If she said yes, she was admitting to surveillance. If she said no, she was lying, and he would know she was lying because men like Kang Tae-min didn't ask questions they didn't already know the answers to. I notice what I need to notice to do my job, she said. Nothing more. The faintest ghost of something, respect maybe, or at least recognition, crossed his features. That answer tells me everything, he said. You're intelligent, you're observant, and you've been pretending to be neither. He walked to his desk and opened a drawer. I'm going to show you something, and once you see it, we can't go backward. Then maybe don't show me. It's too late for that. He pulled a manila folder from the drawer and set it on the desk between them. Nia looked at the folder. The way you look at a door, you know, leads somewhere you can't return from. Her fingers twitched at her sides. The silk dress suddenly felt too thin, like armor made of paper. She opened it. Photographs. Dozens of them. Printed on high-quality paper, the kind used for surveillance documentation. Each one time-stamped in the lower right corner. Each one showing the same subject. Her. Nia walking to the subway. Nia buying coffee at the corner bodega. Nia sitting in the waiting room at Mount Sinai while her mother received treatment, her face buried in her hands. Nia and Darius walking through Prospect Park, her arm around his shoulders, both of them laughing at something she couldn't remember anymore. Close-ups of her apartment building. The entrance, the fire escape. Her bedroom window, shot from across the street with a telephoto lens that turned privacy into an illusion. Her hands started shaking. She flipped through more. Darius at school. Her mother being wheeled through the hospital corridor by a nurse whose face Nia recognized. Timestamps going back 3 months. 3 months of someone watching every breath her family took. Who? The word came out cracked. His name is Park Seung-jae. Taemin said the name the way you say the name of a disease you've been fighting for years, with familiarity and contempt in equal measure. He was my father's lieutenant. 15 years ago, when I took control of the organization, Seung-jae challenged me. He lost. I spared his life because killing him would have started a war I wasn't ready to fight. That mercy was a mistake I've been paying for ever since. Nia's eyes were still on the photographs. On her mother's face, captured through a car window, her skin gray from chemo, her eyes closed. He's been hunting me for years, Taemin continued. Taking people I employ, people who work in my buildings. Anyone he believes I might care about, he destroys them to destroy me. Nia looked up. I'm your secretary. Yes. I answer phones and book conference rooms. Yes. So why would anyone think you care about your secretary? The silence that followed her question was the loudest thing she'd ever heard. Taemin's eyes held hers, dark, unreadable, but not empty. Something lived behind that carefully constructed wall, something that looked exhausted from the effort of staying hidden. Because today, he said quietly, you wore red. The words sat between them like a lit fuse. In my world, he continued, red is not a color. It's a statement. When a woman stands beside a man of my position wearing red, it tells every rival, every enemy, every ally watching that she belongs to him, that she carries his protection and his vulnerability in equal measure. It means harming her is the same as declaring war. The room tilted. Nia gripped the back of the chair in front of her because her knees had stopped being trustworthy. I didn't know that, she whispered. I know you didn't. It's a dress. It's just a dress my mother gave me. To you, to Park Seung-jae, and everyone watching this building, you just announced yourself as the most important person in my life. The anger hit so fast it burned away the fear. Then tell them they're wrong. She heard her voice rising and didn't care. Go out there and make some kind of statement or announcement or whatever the hell you people do. Tell them I'm nobody. Tell them I'm just the girl who answers your phone. I can't. Why not? Because denying it now would look like protection, which would confirm the assumption. Nia stared at him. The elegant office with its Hudson River views suddenly felt like the inside of a cage, and the bars were made of silk and stupidity and a dead man's grudge. So what are you telling me, she said, that I'm in danger because of a dress? I'm telling you that Park Seung-jae has already mobilized. My intelligence intercepted communications 90 minutes ago. He believes you are mine. He will use you to get to me, not because it's logical, because he's consumed by hatred, and hatred doesn't need logic. Then I quit. I'll leave right now. I'll go home and pack, and your apartment is already being watched. It was the first thing he locked down. The floor dropped out from under her. She felt it physically, a plummeting sensation in her stomach, like missing a step on a staircase that turned out to be an elevator shaft. Her apartment, where Darius slept, where his school books sat on the kitchen table next to a half-finished bowl of cereal, where his basketball shoes waited by the door with the laces still loose from yesterday. My brother, she said. The words were a blade in her throat. Darius is at school right now. He takes the B train to... Your brother was relocated 40 minutes ago. He's in a secure location with 2 of my men. Your mother has been moved from Mount Sinai to a private facility in Connecticut. Both are safe. Nia's vision blurred. She blinked hard and tears cut down her cheeks before she could stop them, not from sadness but from the sheer violence of relief crashing into rage. You moved my family without asking me? Would you have preferred I waited? I would have preferred you didn't build a life where this kind of thing is necessary. The words hit him. She saw it. A flinch so small it was almost imaginary, but it was there. A fracture in the stone face of a man who had probably been hit with bullets that left less of a mark. You're right, he said. She hadn't expected that. You're right, he repeated. This life creates collateral damage. It always has. And you were never supposed to become part of it. But I am now. Yes, because of a dress. Because of a dress. The silence stretched between them, filled with the distant hum of the city below and the quiet tick of a clock she couldn't see. Nia wiped her face with the back of her hand and straightened her spine. The dress clung to her body like a second skin, like a target, like a prophecy she'd never asked to fulfill. What happens now? Taemin reached into his desk and produced a second folder, thinner than the first. Inside was a single sheet of paper with an address, a phone number, and a name she didn't recognize. I have a safe house in Queens. You'll stay there until the threat is neutralized. You'll have protection. You'll have everything you need. For how long? As long as it takes. That's not an answer. It's the only honest one I can give you. Nia looked at the paper. Then she looked at him. This man who ran an empire of blood from behind a mahogany desk. This man who had moved her family like chess pieces to protect them from a war they didn't know they were part of. This man whose eyes, right now, held something she hadn't been prepared to see. Not power, not control. Guilt. Raw, undiluted, choking guilt. The kind that lives in the chest like a tumor and grows every time you look at the damage you've caused to people who didn't deserve it. You could have fired me months ago, she said. The moment you noticed Seung-jae was watching, you could have let me go. I would have found another job. Maybe I wouldn't have found one that paid this well, But I would have survived. Why didn't you? He didn't answer immediately. He turned back to the windows and looked out at the Hudson like the river held the words he was looking for. Because your mother would have died. The simplicity of it gutted her. You kept me here, she said slowly, so my insurance wouldn't lapse. The treatments she requires aren't covered by standard plans. I personally subsidize the cost through a medical fund tied to senior staff positions. I'm not senior staff. You are on paper. The weight of what he was saying settled over her like a blanket that was also a chain. He hadn't just noticed her. He'd noticed her situation, her mother's illness, the math that kept Nia chained to a job she knew in her bones was dangerous. And instead of using that desperation against her, which a man in his position could have done in 1,000 different ways, he had quietly restructured her employment classification to ensure her mother would live. Why? She asked again. And this time the word wasn't an accusation. It was smaller than that, fragile. The kind of question you ask when you're afraid of every possible answer. Taemin's reflection stared at her from the window glass, a ghost version of himself, transparent, layered over the city below. You remember people's names, he said. Nia frowned. What? The security guards, the maintenance staff, the cleaning crews who work after midnight. You know their names? You ask about their families. When Kim Soo-young in building security had his daughter's piano recital, you asked him how it went. When the night janitor Hector had knee surgery, you brought him soup from the place on Lexington. He paused. No one in this building does that. No one in my life does that. Those are just normal things, not in my world. He turned from the window. In my world, people are assets or liabilities. They are useful or they are obstacles. Kindness is a vulnerability that gets exploited, and compassion is a weakness that gets people killed. His voice dropped. You walk through these halls every day surrounded by men who would end a life over a business disagreement, and you bring coffee to the frightened intern because you noticed her hands were shaking. Nia felt something crack open inside her chest. A door she'd been leaning against for months, holding shut with everything she had. You remind me, Taemin said quietly, that the world I built isn't the only one that exists. The phone on his desk buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and his expression hardened instantly. The moment of vulnerability sealed shut like a wound being cauterized. Junho, he said into the phone. A rapid exchange in Korean followed, sharp and tense, and Nia watched his jaw tighten with every syllable. He hung up. Seungjae's men are moving faster than we anticipated. 3 vehicles spotted crossing the Williamsburg Bridge. Armed. We have maybe 2 hours. 2 hours until what? Until they reach this building. The world condensed to the space between heartbeats. I need to leave, Nia said. Give me the safe house address. I'll take a cab. The streets aren't safe. His people have surveillance on every exit. The moment you step outside, then what am I supposed to do? Stay here and wait for them to come to me? Stay here where I can protect you. I don't want your protection. The words erupted from her like a confession she'd been holding underwater, and she saw the impact cross his face. Not offense, not anger, but something closer to recognition. Like he'd heard those words before, from other people, in other moments, and every time they'd been right. What you want, he said carefully, and what will keep you alive are 2 different things right now. Don't talk to me about staying alive when you're the reason I might die. He absorbed that, took it full in the chest, and didn't flinch this time. And Nia hated herself for saying it, and hated him more for not fighting back, because anger needed resistance to survive, and he was giving her nothing to push against. The door opened. Junho entered without knocking, a breach of protocol that told Nia everything about the urgency. Sir, building security is at level 3. We're locking the upper floors. Stairwells are sealed. I need you in the operations room. Taemin nodded once, then he looked at Nia. Stay on this floor. Don't use the elevators. Don't go near the windows. Don't tell me what to do. Miss Holloway. His voice changed. The warmth, whatever fraction of warmth had existed moments ago, evaporated, replaced by something absolute. Something forged in years of giving orders that kept people alive. In approximately 90 minutes, armed men are going to try to enter this building with the specific intention of killing you. You can hate me later. Right now, you will stay on this floor away from the windows, or I will have Junho physically restrain you, and neither of us wants that." The words landed like concrete. Junho's face was carved from wood. He stared straight ahead, but his body was already positioned between Nia and the door. Not threatening, but unmovable. Nia's teeth clenched so hard her jaw ached. The red dress clung to her body like something alive, and she wanted to rip it off, tear it to pieces, burn it on the marble floor of this obscene office, and let the ashes settle on his perfect mahogany desk. But she stayed, because beneath the rage and the terror and the animal instinct screaming at her to run, some deeper calculation was running. The same calculation that had kept her alive in Bed-Stuy when the block got dangerous. The same math that had told her to take this job even when her gut said something was off. Survival math. The cold arithmetic of a woman who had been keeping herself and her family alive through intelligence and patience since she was 19 years old. He was right. She hated that he was right. But he was right. "Fine," she said. "But when this is over, you and I are going to have a conversation that you are not going to enjoy." Something moved in Taemin's eyes. If she didn't know better, and she absolutely did not know better, not with this man, not in this world, she would have called it admiration. Then he was gone. The office fell silent. Nia stood alone in the enormous room, surrounded by glass and marble and money, and she felt more trapped than she'd ever felt in her cramped apartment in Bed-Stuy. She walked to the windows despite his warning. Not close enough to be seen from outside, but close enough to look down at the streets far below, where Manhattan hummed and groaned through its Friday routine. Yellow cabs cutting through slush, pedestrians hunched against the cold, breath billowing, hands shoved deep in pockets. None of them knew what was coming. None of them knew that somewhere in this city, men with guns were driving toward this building because a woman put on a red dress. The absurdity of it almost made her laugh. Almost. Her phone buzzed in the pocket she'd sewn into the dress lining. A trick she'd learned from her mother, who believed any garment without pockets was an insult to women everywhere. A text from Darius. "Yoni, some suit-wearing dudes came and got me from school. Said you sent them? What's going on? They won't let me use Instagram." She typed fast. "Stay with them. Don't argue. I'll explain everything tonight. Love you." 3 dots. Then, "You in trouble?" Her fingers hovered over the screen. The truth was a luxury she couldn't afford. "No, just work stuff. Stay off your phone and do whatever they tell you." "This is Madsus Ni. I know. Trust me." She put the phone away and pressed her forehead against the cold glass. 42 floors below, the city continued its oblivious grind. Up here, in the polished cage of Kang Tae-min's empire, time was doing something different. Time was compressing, accelerating toward a collision that felt as inevitable as gravity. Minutes passed, or hours. She couldn't tell. Then the sounds began. At first she thought it was construction, the dull, distant percussion of heavy machinery. But the rhythm was wrong, too irregular, too sharp. And it was getting closer. Her phone lit up with an alert, NYPD advisory. Active incident reported in Lower Manhattan. Avoid financial district area. Then another. Multiple reports of gunfire near Fulton Street. Sheltering in place recommended. Nia backed away from the windows. The building shuddered. Not an earthquake. Something worse. The low concussive thud of an explosion somewhere below, distant but definite, like the building's bones had absorbed a blow. Lights flickered overhead. Once. Twice. Then steadied. The door to the office flew open. A young Korean guard she recognized, Min Jun, barely older than Darius, who she'd caught reading manga in the break room last month, burst in with a tactical vest over his suit and an expression that belonged on a much older face. "Ma'am, you need to come with me now." "What's happening?" "They breached the lobby." The words fell through her body like cold water. "That's impossible. The security here is—" "They drove an armored vehicle through the front entrance. There are at least 15 hostiles in the building. Mr. Kang has engaged on the 38th floor. We need to get you to the interior safe room." Nia's legs moved before her brain gave permission. Minjun took her elbow, gently, like he was afraid of breaking something, and guided her through a corridor she'd never noticed behind Taemin's private bookshelf. A concealed door. A narrow hallway lit by emergency strips in the floor. The walls were reinforced steel painted to look like drywall, and the air smelled like gun oil and recycled oxygen. They moved fast. Min Jun's hand stayed on her arm, and she could feel him shaking. Not from fear, from adrenaline. From the terrible electricity of a young man who had trained for violence but never tasted it until now. Gunfire erupted somewhere below them. Not the distant percussion of before. This was close. This was in the building, the sharp, stuttering rhythm of automatic weapons echoing through stairwells and elevator shafts, bouncing off marble and glass until the whole structure hummed with it. "How old are you?" Nia asked as they moved. Min Jun glanced at her, confused by the question. 23. "You got a girlfriend?" "Ma'am, we really need to answer the question." "Yeah, her name's Yuna. She works at a bakery in Flushing." "When this is over, you take Yuna to a nice restaurant, somewhere with tablecloths, and you tell her about this and you let her be scared for you. Don't do that thing men do where you pretend it was nothing. Let her see you. You hear me?" Min Jun stared at her with an expression that wasn't quite confusion and wasn't quite gratitude. Something in between. Something human. "Yes, ma'am." "Good. Now get us wherever we're going." They reached a steel door with a keypad. Min Jun punched in a code with fingers that had steadied, and the door opened onto a room that was clearly designed for exactly this situation. Monitors covering one wall showed security feeds from throughout the building. A bench bolted to the floor. Emergency supplies and locked cabinets. No windows. Min Jun positioned himself at the door with his weapon drawn, and Nia sat on the bench and stared at the monitors. She found Tae Min on camera 6. He was on the 38th floor, moving through a corridor of shattered glass and overturned furniture with 3 of his men flanking him. He held a weapon with the ease of someone holding an extension of his own body. No tension, no fumbling, just the fluid economy of a man who had been trained to kill since he was old enough to understand the word. The polished businessman was gone. The creature moving through that corridor was something older, something the suits and the corporate language had been built to contain. Dragon tattoos she'd never seen climbed his neck above his collar, emerging from beneath the white shirt like something that had been waiting to surface. She watched him clear a room, watched him move through a doorway with his weapon up, check the corners, signal his men forward. Watched a hostile come around a corner with an automatic rifle, and watched Tae Min drop him with a single shot that was so precise it almost looked gentle. On another monitor, she saw the lobby, or what used to be the lobby. An armored SUV sat embedded in what had been the front entrance, its doors open, the marble floor around it scattered with glass and debris. Bodies in black tactical gear lay motionless near the elevators. Hanuel security was holding the perimeter, but more vehicles were arriving outside. Nia's eyes moved from screen to screen, watching the building she'd worked in for 8 months transform into a battlefield. She thought about her desk upstairs, with its neat stack of folders, and the small, succulent plant she'd named Gerald, because naming things made them feel manageable. She thought about the break room where she heated up leftover rice and beans. She thought about all the mornings she'd walked through that lobby and smiled at the security guards and pretended this was a normal job, in a normal building, in a normal life. None of it was normal. None of it had ever been normal. And the red dress was the thing that had finally torn away the curtain. On monitor 6, Tae Min reached a stairwell door and paused. He said something to Junho, who nodded and peeled off with 2 men toward a service corridor. Tae Min went through the stairwell door alone. "He shouldn't be alone," Nia said. Min Jun glanced at the monitor. "Mr. Kong operates independently when the situation calls for it. He prefers samas. I didn't ask what he prefers. I said he shouldn't be alone." But there was nothing she could do. She was trapped in a steel box 42 floors above the street, wearing a red dress that had turned her into a target, watching a man she barely knew fight a war she didn't understand on a security monitor that made everything look small and distant and already over. The building shook again, harder this time. The monitors flickered and one of them went black, camera 12, which covered the north stairwell. Then the emergency lights kicked on, bathing the safe room in red. Red walls, red floor, red light painting everything the color of the dress she wished she'd never touched. And on monitor 3, Nia saw something that stopped her breath. A figure emerging from the smoke on the ground floor. Tall, lean, moving with the deliberate calm of a man who had waited years for this moment and intended to savor every second of it. Park Seung-jae. She knew it was him even though she'd never seen his face before. Knew it the way prey knows the shape of a predator. By the intention in his movement, by the hunger in his silhouette, by the way the smoke seemed to part around him like even the air was afraid. He carried an assault rifle in one hand and a photograph in the other. Nia couldn't see the photograph on the monitor, but she knew, with the certainty of a woman who had spent her whole life reading situations to survive them, that the photograph was of her. He stopped in the ruined lobby and looked up, directly at the camera, directly at her, and smiled. The monitor went black. The monitor stayed black for 3 seconds, then 4, then 5. Nia counted each one the way a drowning person counts the distance to the surface, with desperate arithmetic, with lungs already burning. Her reflection stared back at her from the dead screen, a ghost version of herself painted in emergency red. The silk dress turned to blood color under the backup lights. Min-jun. The young guard was already moving. He pressed his earpiece deeper and spoke rapid Korean into his wrist mic, his voice cracking on syllables that came too fast. Nia didn't need a translation. The cadence told her everything, urgency collapsing into something worse, confusion. Nobody on the other end was answering. "What's happening?" she demanded. "Comms are fragmented. The explosion took out a relay on the 31st floor. I'm getting partial signal from Junho's team, but nothing from Taemin." Minjun's jaw tightened. He didn't confirm it. He didn't need to. Nia stood up from his bench. Her knees felt like someone had replaced the bones with wet cardboard, but she locked them straight and walked to the monitor wall. 7 of the 12 screens still showed grainy feeds. Stairwells choked with smoke, corridors of shattered glass, the ruined lobby where Seung-jae had stood moments ago. But Seung-jae was gone now. The space where he'd smiled up at the camera was empty, just rubble and twisted steel and a silence that felt worse than the gunfire. He was inside the building, moving upward, coming for her. "We need to move," she said. "Ma'am, this room is reinforced. The protocol says..." The protocol was written before somebody drove a truck through the front door. He saw the camera. He knows where the security feeds route to, which means he knows there's a safe room and he's going to find it. Minjun's face went through something complicated. She watched the conflict play out in real time, training versus instinct, orders versus the raw animal recognition that she was right. "I can't take you into the building," he said. "There are hostiles on at least 4 floors." "Then take me up." "Up?" "The roof. There's a helipad, isn't there?" "Yes, but there's no helicopter on standby. We'd need at least..." "I don't need a helicopter. I need distance from the ground. Every floor between me and that man is another floor he has to fight through. Take me up." Minjun stared at her. She could see him recalculating, running the scenario the way she'd watched Junho run scenarios. Cold, mechanical, stripping emotion from the equation until only geometry remained. Vertical distance. Defensible positions. Choke points in stairwells that favored the defender. "The service elevator on the east side has an independent power supply," he said slowly. "It doesn't connect to the main system. If the shaft is clear, I can get us to the 52nd floor. From there, it's 2 flights of stairs to roof access." "Then let's go." He hesitated one more second. Then he pulled a backup weapon from his ankle holster, a compact black pistol that looked alien in his young hands, and held it out to her grip first. "Do you know how to use this?" Nia took it. The weight was obscene, dense, cold, pulling her wrist down with the gravity of everything it represented. She checked the safety the way her Uncle Jerome had shown her when she was 16, back when their bed-stuy block had gotten bad enough that he'd decided ignorance was more dangerous than knowledge. "Yeah," she said. "I know." Something shifted in Minjun's eyes. A recalibration. Whatever category he'd filed her under, civilian, secretary, someone to protect, she watched him quietly discard it. "Stay behind me. If I go down, you keep moving up. Don't stop for anything." "You're not going down." "Ma'am, you've got a girlfriend who works at a bakery. You're not going down. That's not how today ends." He almost smiled. Almost. Then he opened the safe room door and the corridor swallowed them. The east wing of the 42nd floor was untouched by the fighting below, but the absence of damage was its own kind of wrong. Emergency lights pulsed in slow red waves along the baseboards, turning the familiar hallway into something from a fever dream. Nia's desk sat exactly where she'd left it an hour ago. The computer still logged in, the screensaver cycling through default landscapes, Gerald the succulent sitting in his terracotta pot like nothing had happened. An hour ago, she'd been checking email, scheduling a quarterly review meeting, wondering if she had enough in her account to buy Darius that winter coat. Now she was moving through a building under siege with a gun in her hand and a dead man's hatred painted on her back. Minjun led her past the reception area and through a maintenance corridor she'd never noticed. The walls back here were unpainted concrete, the real skeleton of the building stripped of its corporate costume. Pipes ran along the ceiling, sweating condensation that dripped onto the floor in irregular rhythms. Their footsteps echoed too loud, and Nia found herself matching Minjun's pace instinctively, placing her feet where he placed his, 2 heartbeats trying to pass as one. The service elevator was tucked behind a utility closet. Minjun swiped a keycard and the doors opened with a mechanical groan that made both of them flinch. Inside was steel and fluorescent light, a box designed for moving equipment, not people, with scratched walls and a floor stained by years of industrial use. They stepped in. Minjun pressed 52. The doors closed. For 8 seconds, the world was just the hum of cables and the smell of machine oil and 2 people breathing too fast in a metal coffin. "Thank you," Nia said quietly. Minjun kept his eyes on the floor indicator. "For what?" "For not leaving me in that room. You didn't give me much choice." "That's not true. You could have said no." His jaw worked. The numbers climbed. 44. 45. "My father works in the Busan shipyards," Minjun said, the words coming out like they'd been stored under pressure. 14-hour shifts. He sent me to the States because he thought I'd have options. Better life. The usual story. He paused. "I ended up here because the pay was good and I didn't ask questions. Same reason as everyone else in this building. Same reason as me." "Yeah." He looked at her. "Same reason as you." 48. 49. The elevator lurched. Not a stop. A seizure. The box jerked sideways with a metallic scream that threw Nia against the wall and sent Minjun stumbling into the control panel. The lights went out, came back, went out again, then stopped on 50. The doors didn't open. Minjun jabbed the button. Nothing. He pried at the seam with his fingers, the tendons in his forearms standing out like cables, but the doors were locked tight. Some failsafe triggered by the power disruption that had turned their escape route into a trap. "Emergency release is on the outside," he said, breathing hard. "I can get to it through the ceiling hatch, but I need you to—" The radio on his vest crackled to life. Junho's voice came through, shattered by static but unmistakable. A voice built for barking orders now stripped down to something rawer, something that sounded almost like desperation. 38th is lost. Seongjae has the east stairwell. All units fall back to. Say again, all units. Minjun pressed his earpiece. "Junho, this is Minjun. I have the principal in the east service elevator, stalled on 50. We need extraction." Static. "Junho, copy." More static. Then, through the interference, a different voice, deeper, colder. Speaking Korean with a precision that made Minjun's face go white. Minjun ripped the earpiece out. "What did he say?" Nia asked. Minjun didn't answer. He was staring at the earpiece in his palm like it was a dead thing he'd pulled from his own body. "Minjun, what did he say?" The young guard swallowed. His throat moved like he was trying to get something jagged down. "He said your name." The air in the elevator turned solid. Nia felt it press against her chest, heavy and cold and intimate, like a hand closing around her lungs. "Seongjae is on the comms? He took a radio off one of our men. He knows the frequencies. And he said my name. He said he knows you're moving up. He said the roof is where caged birds go when they run out of hallways." Nia leaned against the elevator wall. The metal was cold through the silk of her dress, and she let it anchor her, let the physical sensation pull her back from the edge of a panic that was circling like something with wings. Think the way you've always thought. Think like a woman who's been outrunning trouble since before trouble had a name. "The ceiling hatch," she said. "Get it open. We climb." Minjun looked up. The hatch was a 2-foot square panel directly above them, held by 4 bolts. He holstered his weapon, jumped, caught the edge of the panel, and pulled. One bolt snapped, then another. The panel swung open and cold air rushed in from the shaft above, a wind that smelled like grease and concrete in the high, thin emptiness of altitude. He hoisted himself up and through with an athleticism that made his age suddenly visible. 23. Barely a year older than Darius, fighting a war he didn't start for a boss he couldn't question. His hand reached back down. "Give me the gun first, then your hand." Nia passed up the compact pistol, then reached for his hand. His grip was iron, surprising from fingers that had been trembling 40 minutes ago. He pulled her through the hatch and onto the roof of the elevator car, and for a moment they both crouched in the shaft, breathing the machine-dark air, listening to the cables groan above them. The shaft was a column of shadow stretching up into darkness. Emergency lights mounted every 3 floors cast weak yellow pools that did nothing but make the gaps between them more absolute. Maintenance ladders bolted to the wall ran vertically alongside the cable tracks. Steel rungs slicked with grease, each one a test of grip and nerve. 2 floors, Minjun said. 20 rungs, maybe 25. Nia looked up. The darkness above was total, the kind of dark that pressed against your eyes like something physical. "I'll go first," she said. "Ma'am, if somebody's waiting at the top, they'll expect an armed guard, not a woman in a red dress. That buys us half a second." Half a second is the difference between a bullet that hits and a bullet that misses. I grew up in Bed-Stuy. I know the math. Minjun wanted to argue. She could see it building in his chest, the professional objection rising like a tide. But he looked at her face, at the set of her jaw, at the eyes that had stopped asking permission somewhere between the safe room and this elevator shaft, and he swallowed the argument whole. She reached for the first rung. The grease was thick and cold. Her fingers slipped immediately, and she clenched harder, feeling the metal bite into her palms. The dress was a nightmare for climbing. Silk catching on bolts, the hem tangling around her knees with every step upward. She kicked it free, heard something tear, and didn't care. The woman who had put on this dress that morning in her Bed-Stuy apartment, the woman who had wanted to feel beautiful for one day, just one day, in a life that rarely allowed it, that woman was gone. The woman climbing this greasy ladder in the dark was someone different, someone harder, someone who had shed the luxury of vanity the way a snake sheds skin. Rung by rung, hand over hand, the muscles in her arms screamed after the first floor. Her shoulders burned. Sweat ran down her back beneath the silk, mixing with grease and fear into something chemical. Below her, Minjun climbed in steady rhythm, his breathing controlled, his weapon holstered to keep both hands free. 15 rungs. 18. 20. The 52nd floor landing materialized from the darkness. A narrow maintenance platform with a door marked Authorized Personnel Only in faded stencil. Nia hauled herself onto the platform and collapsed against the wall, her chest heaving, her hands black with grease and trembling with exertion. Minjun pulled himself up beside her. He was sweating through his shirt, his tactical vest dark with it, but his eyes were already scanning the door, the hinges, the gap between the door and the frame. He listened, pressed his ear to the cold metal, held up one finger. Wait. 10 seconds of silence that felt like a year. Then he opened the door. The 52nd floor was corporate storage. Rows of filing cabinets and archived equipment under dust covers, lit by emergency strips that cast everything in dim amber. The air was stale, undisturbed, the kind of air that accumulates in rooms nobody visits. No footprints in the thin layer of dust on the floor. No sound except the building's deep mechanical breathing. They moved through the storage room to a fire exit. The stairwell beyond was narrow and concrete, functional as a spine, rising 2 more flights to a door marked Roof Access. Minjun went first this time. She let him. Some arguments weren't worth the energy. He pushed the roof door open and cold air hit Nia like a wall of ice. January wind tore across the rooftop, carrying snow crystals that stung exposed skin. The helipad was a flat circle of painted concrete at the building's center, ringed by low barriers. Beyond the barriers, Manhattan spread in every direction, a grid of lights and glass and human ambition that looked impossibly normal from up here, impossibly calm, as if the violence happening 50 floors below was a rumor the city had chosen not to believe. Nia walked to the edge and looked down. Police lights turned the streets into a carnival of blue and red. Barricades blocked intersections for 3 blocks in every direction. She could see SWAT vehicles, armored trucks, news vans with satellite dishes tilted toward the building like mechanical sunflowers. A helicopter circled to the east, its spotlight sweeping the lower floors. From up here, the war looked small. From up here, everything looked small. Her phone buzzed. She pulled it from the torn pocket of her dress with grease-blackened fingers. Unknown number. A text. "You climb well for a secretary." Her blood stopped. She showed the screen to Min-jun. She watched the color drain from his face in real time, watched the professional composure he'd been building all day collapse like a structure whose foundation had been pulled out. "He's watching the building," Min-jun said. "From outside, probably thermal, or—" He stopped, pressed his earpiece. The static that came back was different now. Cleaner, closer, like the interference had been peeled away to let something specific through. Then Taemin's voice cut through, ragged, breathing hard, but alive. "Min-jun, report." "Sir, principal is on the roof. We are exposed. Seung-jae has visual surveillance." He sent a message to her phone. A pause. 3 seconds that carried the weight of calculation happening at a speed most human brains couldn't sustain. How did he get her number? Min-jun looked at Nia. Nia looked at her phone. The answer surfaced from a memory she hadn't thought about in weeks. A memory so mundane it had dissolved into the routine of her daily life. "The intern," she whispered. "What?" "Last month. A new intern. Quiet girl. Said her name was Hana. She was nervous, shaking, looked terrified on her first day. I gave her my number, told her to call me if she needed anything." The silence on the radio was worse than static. "There was no intern named Hana," Taemin said. The roof tilted beneath Nia's feet. She felt it, the physical sensation of the ground betraying her, of every kind gesture she'd ever made weaponized against her by a man she'd never met. Her kindness. The exact thing Taemin said made her different. The exact thing he said reminded him of humanity. Seung-jae had used it as a door. She'd handed a stranger her phone number because the girl's hands were shaking, because Nia Holloway was the kind of person who noticed when someone was scared and did something about it. Because that's who she was, who she'd always been. And now that fundamental piece of her identity had been turned into a weapon aimed at her own head. "Nia," Taemin's voice on the radio. Not Miss Holloway. Not the formal distance of employer to employee. Her name, raw and undecorated. "I'm here. I'm coming to you. Stay on the roof. Do not go back inside." "Where are you?" A pause filled with sounds she didn't want to identify. Heavy breathing, something metal scraping against concrete, a distant voice shouting in Korean. "Close," he said. "I'm close." The line went dead. Nia stood on the roof of the building with the wind tearing through the red silk dress and the city burning below, and a phone in her hand that connected her to a man who wanted her dead because another man couldn't admit he wanted her alive. Min-jun took up position by the roof access door, weapon drawn, eyes locked on the threshold. And they waited. 3 minutes later, the door burst open, and it wasn't Taemin. 2 men in black tactical gear came through fast, rifles up, moving in the coordinated sweep of men who had rehearsed this breach. Min-jun fired twice from his position behind the doorframe. The first shot caught the lead man in the vest. He staggered, didn't fall. The second shot went wide as the second hostile fired back, and the muzzle flash turned the rooftop into a strobe of white and shadow. Min-jun took a round in the shoulder. Nia saw it happen, saw his body jerk, saw the surprise on his face like he'd been slapped by someone he trusted. He dropped to one knee but kept firing, his left arm hanging useless, his right hand steady on the weapon with the discipline that came from somewhere deeper than training. Nia raised the compact pistol Min-jun had given her. Her hands were shaking so badly the barrel drew figure eights in the air. She'd fired a gun exactly twice in her life, both times at paper targets in her uncle's backyard in Far Rockaway, and the distance between that memory and this moment was measured in lifetimes. She didn't fire. She couldn't. Not because the gun was too heavy or the distance too far, but because pulling that trigger would make her a participant in something she could never walk away from. Right now she was a victim, a bystander, a woman caught in someone else's war. The moment she fired that weapon, she became a combatant, and combatants don't get to go home. Min-jun dropped the first hostile with a shot that found the gap between vest and helmet. The man crumpled. The second hostile swung toward Minjun, and Nia saw what was about to happen with the clarity of a woman watching a car accident from inside the car. The geometry of the rifle barrel, the angle of the shot, the absolute certainty of what comes next. She screamed. The sound that came out of her wasn't a word. It was something more primitive, a sound from the bottom of the human register, from the place where language hasn't been invented yet. Pure terror compressed into a frequency that cut through the wind and the gunfire and the helicopter noise. The hostile flinched, turned, a fraction of a second of divided attention. Minjun fired. The man went down. Then the rooftop door opened again and Kang Tai-min walked through it. He looked like something that had crawled out of a war zone. His shirt was torn open at the collar, revealing the dragon tattoos that climbed his neck and disappeared beneath the fabric. Blood on his hands. Not his, she would learn later, but in that moment the distinction didn't matter. His face was cut above the left eye, a thin line that bled freely down his cheek. His suit jacket was gone. The shoulder holster he wore over his ruined shirt held a weapon she didn't recognize, larger than Min Jun's, darker, built for a different kind of math. But his eyes found her across the rooftop, like she was the only thing on it. Like the dead men and the blood and the smoke and the helicopter circling overhead were background noise in a conversation that was only about her. "You're bleeding," he said. She looked down. A cut on her forearm. When had that happened? Glass from somewhere, or metal, she didn't know. Blood ran down her wrist and dripped from her fingers onto the concrete, dark spots on gray that the wind smeared into abstract patterns. "It's nothing. It's not nothing." He crossed the roof to her. Junho came through the door behind him, breathing like a bull, tactical vest shredded on the left side, 2 more guards flanking him. They fanned out across the rooftop and secured the perimeter with mechanical efficiency. Taemin stopped in front of her. Close. Closer than he'd ever stood. She could smell the cordite on his skin, the copper of blood, the sharp chemical sting of adrenaline. Beneath it, barely, the cedar scent of his office. The one she'd been breathing for 8 months without realizing it had become familiar. "Minjun's hit," she said. Taemin glanced at the young guard, who had slumped against the wall with his hand pressed to his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. He nodded at Junho, who was already moving toward Minjun with a medical kit. "He saved my life," Nia said. "I know." Taemin's voice was quiet. The voice of a man who had used up his volume somewhere in the stairwells below and had nothing left but the truth. "I heard everything on comms. The intern, Hana, she was Seong-jae's plant." "Yes. He used my kindness to find me." Taemin said nothing, but his eyes changed. Something moved behind the exhaustion and the blood and the adrenaline. A recognition that went deeper than tactical assessment, deeper than the cold arithmetic of threat and response. "You're not safe here," he said. "You're not safe anywhere in the city as long as Seong-jae is breathing. Then stop him." "I'm trying." "Try harder." The words came out with an edge that surprised them both. Nia heard herself, heard the anger, the exhaustion, the accumulated weight of a day that had started with $37 in her checking account and ended on a rooftop surrounded by dead men. And she didn't soften it, didn't take it back, didn't apologize. Tai-min looked at her the way you look at a fire you didn't expect to find burning in a place where nothing should be able to burn. Then his phone rang. He answered it without breaking eye contact with her. Listened. His face, already carved by the day's violence, went through one final transformation. Something she'd never seen in him before, in 8 months of watching and cataloging and surviving. Fear. Real, marrow-deep, bone-cracking fear. He lowered the phone. "That was my contact inside the NYPD," he said. "Seong-jae isn't in the building anymore." "Then where?" He was never trying to reach the roof. The assault was a diversion. His real team, the one nobody saw, went east. Taemin's voice dropped to a frequency she felt in her sternum. "Toward Connecticut." The word detonated in her chest. Connecticut. Where her mother lay in a private hospital bed, where the woman who had bought her this red dress was sleeping under clean sheets paid for by a criminal's guilty conscience, guarded by men who answered to the man standing in front of her. Nia's hand closed around Tai-min's wrist. Her fingers left grease and blood on his skin. "If he touches her," she said, and her voice was something she didn't recognize, low, flat, emptied of everything except the one truth that mattered. "I will kill him myself." Taemin looked at her hand on his wrist, at the blood mixing between them, his, hers, strangers, at the red dress torn and grease-stained and streaked with someone else's war. "Then we go now," he said, "together." Behind them, the helicopter spotlight swept across the rooftop, turning the concrete white, and for one frozen second Nia saw their shadows stretched out ahead of them. Two dark shapes reaching toward the edge of the building, toward the city, toward a darkness that had no bottom and no mercy, and no interest in letting either of them go. She didn't release his wrist. He didn't pull away. And somewhere in Connecticut, a phone was ringing in an empty guard station, and nobody was answering. The helicopter landed on the roof at 4:47 p.m. A matte black civilian model with no markings, no registration numbers visible, piloted by a man whose face Nia never saw because he wore a helmet with a tinted visor and never turned around. Taemin's hand pressed against the small of her back as they ran beneath the rotor wash, the wind flattening the torn red silk against her body like a second skin trying to peel itself away. Junho climbed in behind them. Minjun stayed on the roof, his shoulder wound too severe for anything but the paramedics already fighting their way up through the building. Nia looked back as the helicopter lifted and saw him sitting against the wall with his hand pressed to the wound, his face tilted up toward the sky, watching them leave with an expression she couldn't read from that distance but would remember for years. The city dropped away beneath them. Manhattan became geometry, a grid of light and concrete shrinking into abstraction as the helicopter banked east and climbed hard over the East River. Below, police lights still pulsed around the Hanuel building like a wound the city was trying to close. Nia sat in the rear seat with her hands gripping her knees, the compact pistol still tucked against her thigh. Taemin sat beside her, his phone pressed to his ear, speaking Korean in rapid bursts that she couldn't follow, but whose rhythm she could read like music. Staccato urgency, long pauses filled with something that tasted like controlled fury, then another burst. He hung up. "The facility in Connecticut is called Meadowbrook," he said, not looking at her. "Private. 12 beds. My organization funds it through a medical trust. Your mother is in room 7 on the 2nd floor. "How many guards?" 4. All armed. All loyal." "You said that about your intern, too." The words landed and she watched him absorb them. His jaw set. The cut above his eye had stopped bleeding, but dried blood traced a line down his cheek like a scar that hadn't committed yet. "The guard station went dark 14 minutes ago," he said. "That could mean a communications failure. It could mean a power outage from the storm system moving through the area. Or it could mean they're dead." He didn't deny it. Nia pressed her forehead against the helicopter window. The glass vibrated against her skull, a mechanical tremor that matched the one running through her body. Below, Connecticut's suburbs unfolded. Quiet streets, snow-covered lawns, Christmas lights still hanging on porches because January hadn't been cold enough to motivate their removal. Normal life. Normal people eating Friday dinner and arguing about television and not knowing that somewhere above them a woman in a torn red dress was racing to reach her mother before a dead man's grudge got there first. "How long?" she asked. 20 minutes. 20 minutes. Her mother could die in 20 minutes. Her mother could already be dead. The thought moved through Nia's body like electricity. A full-body current that locked her muscles and stole her breath and left behind a residue of something she'd never felt before. Not fear. Something past fear. Something that lived on the other side of the worst thing you can imagine, where the air is thin and the math is simple, and the only equation that matters is distance divided by time. "Faster," she said. Taemin spoke to the pilot. The helicopter's nose dipped and the engine pitch changed. A deeper growl, a harder push, the machine giving everything it had to a woman it couldn't see and a destination it didn't understand. Junho checked his weapon in the seat across from them. His movements were practiced, automatic. Magazine ejected, inspected, reseated with a click that sounded like a period at the end of a sentence. He caught Nia watching him and held her gaze for a moment that carried no warmth but something adjacent to it. Acknowledgement. The recognition that whatever she was, she had earned the right to be in this helicopter through a currency he understood. Then his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, and his face did something Nia had never seen it do. It crumbled. Not dramatically. Not the cinematic collapse of a man receiving devastating news. Something quieter and worse. A micro-fracture in the architecture of a face built to withstand anything. His eyes widened by a millimeter. His lips parted. The hand holding the phone developed a tremor so fine it was almost invisible. "Junho," Taemin said. A command disguised as a name. The head of security looked up. The man staring at Taemin across the helicopter cabin was not the same man who had checked his weapon 30 seconds ago. That man was a professional. This man was something that came after professionalism failed. "It's Lee Sang-wook," Junho said. The name hit Taemin like a physical blow. Nia watched his entire body change, his spine stiffening, his hands going still on his thighs, his breathing halting for a count of 2 before resuming at a different rhythm. "What about him?" "He's with Seong-jae." The helicopter cabin contracted. The air pressure shifted. Something fundamental about the reality they'd been operating in cracked down the middle and fell apart. "That's not possible," Taemin said. His voice was level, but his eyes were telling a different story. A story about a foundation being ripped out from under a structure that had taken years to build. "Sang-wook has been feeding him information for 11 months, Junho said, reading from his phone with the mechanical precision of a man delivering a report he wished he could undeliver. "The surveillance photos of Miss Holloway. They came from inside our system. Security camera access codes, patrol schedules, the Connecticut facility location, all of it. Sang-wook doesn't have that level of clearance. He does since you promoted him to head of intelligence last March." Nia watched Taemin's face. She'd seen this man walk through gunfire without flinching, take a building back from armed invaders with the calm efficiency of someone solving a math problem. But this was different. This was the face of a man watching the ground open beneath the one place he thought was solid. "I trained him," Taemin said. The words came out stripped of everything. No anger, no disbelief, just the hollow sound of a fact being examined from the inside. "Sang-wook was 19 when he came to me. His father owed a debt to my family and Sang-wook worked it off. I trained him personally for 6 years. And Seong-jae turned him. When? We don't know. The earliest compromised data we've found is from last February. It could go back further." Nia's mind was running calculations she didn't want to run. Last February. 11 months ago. She'd started working at Hanul Group 14 months ago, which meant that for nearly her entire tenure, every morning she'd walked through that lobby, every afternoon she'd sat at her desk, every evening she'd ridden the elevator down to the street. A man inside Taemin's inner circle had been watching her through the system's own eyes and feeding that information to the person who wanted her dead. "The guards in Connecticut," she said, and both men turned to look at her. "The 4 men protecting my mother. Did Sang-wook know who they were?" Junho's silence was the answer. "Did he assign them?" More silence. Heavier this time. The kind that comes with the weight of realization. The slow, nauseating understanding that the security you trusted wasn't security at all. It was a stage set dressed to look like protection, while the real threat walked through the back door. "He vetted them," Junho finally said. "Standard protocol. All personnel assignments for satellite facilities go through the head of intelligence." Nia felt something break inside her chest, not her heart, something more structural. The load-bearing wall of trust that she'd built around the decision to stay in this world, to accept Taemin's protection, to believe that the man who had quietly restructured her employment to save her mother's life was capable of keeping that life safe. She turned to Taemin. "You promoted a traitor," she said. "You gave him the keys to everything. And then you put my mother's life in his hands." Taemin took it. He took it the way he'd taken everything she'd thrown at him today. Without defense, without deflection, with the absolute stillness of a man who understood that the person in front of him was right, and that being right entitled her to draw blood. "Yes," he said, "my mother, who is lying in a hospital bed right now, unable to walk, unable to fight, unable to do anything except trust that the people around her have her best interests. Yes. And you didn't know. The great Kong Tai-min, the White Viper, the man who sees everything and controls everything and has informants in every shadow. You didn't know that the man sitting at your right hand was selling you to your worst enemy." "No, I didn't know." The admission hung in the air like smoke. Nia stared at him and saw for the first time what he looked like without the architecture. Without the control, the calculation, the masterful management of every variable in every room. She saw a man who had made a mistake so fundamental that all the power and fear and money in the world couldn't fix it. She saw a man who was afraid. Not of Seong-jae, not of bullets or blood or the violence that was almost certainly waiting for them at the end of this helicopter ride. Afraid of her. Afraid of what he'd done to her. Afraid that the one person who reminded him of humanity was about to watch him fail at the one thing that mattered. 12 minutes, the pilot said over the intercom. Junho was already on his phone, trying to reach the Connecticut facility through backup channels. His fingers moved across the screen with desperate speed, cycling through numbers and frequencies. Each attempt met with the same result. Silence. The kind of silence that doesn't mean nobody's there. The kind that means somebody was there and isn't anymore. I have a secondary team 20 minutes out from Meadowbrook, Junho said. 5 men, full tactical. That's 8 minutes behind us, Taemin said. We wait for them. No. Sir, if Sang-wook compromised the guard detail, then Seong-jae knows the facility layout, the security codes, the patrol patterns. Walking in without backup is my decision, not yours. Junho's mouth opened, closed. The muscles in his jaw worked against something that wanted very badly to come out. In another life, in a life where hierarchy meant less and survival meant more, he might have said it, whatever it was. The objection that sat behind his teeth like a loaded round. But he didn't. Because Junho was a soldier before he was a man, and soldiers follow orders even when the orders smell like death. Then we go in fast, Junho said. Entry through the east wing. Your mother's room is on the 2nd floor, northwest corner. If they haven't moved her, that's where she'll be. He was talking to Nia, looking at her directly, cutting Taemin out of the conversation with a precision that was almost surgical. This is about you, his eyes said. This is about your mother. The rest of it, the betrayal, the politics, the years of blood between powerful men, none of that matters right now. Nia nodded. Her hand found the pistol at her thigh. She felt the weight of it, not just the physical mass of metal and mechanism, but the moral weight, the gravitational pull of a choice she hadn't made yet, but could feel approaching with the inevitability of the ground rushing up to meet a falling body. The suburbs below gave way to darker stretches, wooded areas, frozen lakes, the kind of rural Connecticut landscape that looked peaceful from the air in the way that empty rooms look peaceful before you find out why they're empty. Then she saw it. A cluster of buildings set back from the road, surrounded by bare oaks and bordered by a stone wall. Low-slung architectures at 2 stories, white clapboard, the kind of building designed to look like a country home rather than a medical facility. Warm light in most of the windows. A parking lot with 4 cars, one of them a black SUV that could have been security or could have been a delivery vehicle or could have been the last thing standing between her mother and the man hunting her. That's Meadowbrook, Junho said. Nia pressed her face against the glass. She scanned the grounds, the walkways, the entrance, the tree line along the east side. Everything looked normal. Everything looked quiet. The kind of quiet that made her stomach clench because she'd learned, in the span of one single day, that quiet was just noise that hadn't started yet. Then she saw the guard station, a small booth near the front gate, white with a flat roof, lit from inside by a fluorescent tube. The door was open. Not ajar. Open. Wide open, swinging slightly in the wind, and from this altitude Nia could see inside just enough to make out a shape on the floor that was the wrong color and the wrong angle for furniture. Land, she said. We should do a perimeter sweep first. Land the helicopter now. Her voice didn't sound like her own. It came from a place she didn't recognize. A place past fear, past calculation, past every survival instinct she'd spent 25 years developing. This was the voice of a daughter, stripped of everything except the single imperative that predates language and logic and the careful architecture of self-preservation. The helicopter descended. The rotors kicked snow and dead leaves into spiraling curtains as the skids touched down on the facility's back lawn. Nia was out the door before the engines began to wind down. Her shoes, heels she'd put on 12 hours ago in another lifetime, sinking into frozen grass. She kicked them off without breaking stride and ran barefoot through January snow toward the building, and the cold was a blade that cut through the soles of her feet, and she didn't care. She didn't feel it. She felt nothing except the distance between herself and room 7 on the second floor. Taemin caught her before she reached the entrance. His hand closed around her arm. Not rough, but absolute. The grip of a man who had spent his life learning exactly how much force to apply to stop something without breaking it. "Behind me," he said. "Not negotiable." He drew his weapon. Junho flanked the door. The entrance was unlocked. Another wrong detail in a landscape of wrong details. Another piece of evidence that nobody was going to like what they found inside. The lobby was empty. A reception desk with a computer screen still glowing, a vase of artificial flowers knocked sideways, water pooled on the tile floor. The lights were on, but the silence had texture. Thick, pressurized, the silence of a space that had recently contained violence and was still holding its breath. Junho swept left. Taemin went right. Nia followed Taemin because the alternative was standing still. And standing still meant thinking, and thinking meant calculating probabilities she wasn't ready to face. First floor? Clear. Treatment rooms with beds still made. Monitoring equipment humming to no one. A nurse's station with 2 coffee cups, one still warm. Stairwell, second floor. Taemin went up first, weapon raised, his movements silent on the linoleum steps in a way that shouldn't have been possible for a man his size. Nia followed 3 steps behind, barefoot, the cold floor registering somewhere in the back of her mind as a physical fact her body would deal with later. The second floor corridor stretched ahead. White walls, soft lighting, 4 rooms on the left, 4 on the right. Room 7 was at the end, the last door on the left, and it was closed. Taemin moved down the corridor, checking each room. Empty, empty, empty. Medical equipment still running, IV bags still dripping into chairs where patients had been sitting. Wherever the patients were, they'd been moved recently and in a hurry. Room 7. Taemin positioned himself beside the doorframe. Junho mirrored him on the other side, materializing from the stairwell with the silent efficiency of a man whose entire life had been built around appearing in the right place at the right time. Taemin looked at Nia. His eyes asked a question he didn't voice. She answered with a nod so small it barely qualified as movement. He opened the door. The room was warm. That was the first thing Nia registered. Warmth, real warmth, the kind generated by a heating system still functioning in a world that had otherwise come apart. A hospital bed, clean sheets, monitoring equipment beeping in steady rhythm. Empty. The bed was empty. The sheets were pulled back. A patient gown lay crumpled on the floor. The IV stand stood beside the bed with the line disconnected, a single drop of fluid hanging from the needle's tip like a tear that refused to fall. On the pillow, placed with deliberate care, was a photograph. Nia picked it up. Her mother's face stared back at her from the passenger seat of a vehicle she didn't recognize. Her mother's eyes were open, aware, frightened. A man's hand rested on her shoulder. Just the hand, the wrist, the sleeve of a black jacket. No face visible. But on the wrist, a watch she recognized from the intelligence files Taemin had shown her hours ago. Seung-jae's watch. Jae's. On the back of the photograph, written in black marker, with the careful handwriting of a man who had plenty of time and no hurry. Now you know what it feels like to love something he can take from you. Nia's knees buckled. She caught herself on the bed rail, the metal biting into her palms, and a sound came out of her that she would never be able to describe afterward. Not a scream, not a cry, something from beneath both of those, something from the geological layer of the self where language hasn't been invented, and the only communication is raw frequency, pure pain broadcasting on a channel that nothing human should ever have to tune into. Taemin read the words over her shoulder. She felt him go still behind her. Not the controlled stillness of a man choosing his response, but the absolute stillness of a system shutting down and rebooting in a different mode. When he spoke, his voice was something she'd never heard from him. Not cold, not controlled, not the measured frequency of a man who chose every word from a list of thousands. This voice was simple, stripped down to the chassis. The voice of a man making a promise he intended to keep or die fulfilling. I will get her back. Nia turned. Her face was wet. Her hands were shaking. The red dress clung to her body like a wound that wouldn't close, torn and stained and utterly transformed from the thing she'd put on that morning when her biggest problem was $37 in her checking account. Not you, she said. We. She picked up the pistol from where she'd set it on the bed, checked the magazine. 8 rounds. She racked the slide with hands that had stopped shaking, not because the fear was gone, but because something harder had moved in front of it. Something with teeth. Tell me where he's taking her, Nia said, and I'll walk through every door between here and there. Taemin looked at the woman standing before him, barefoot on cold linoleum, torn red silk, grease under her fingernails and blood on her forearm, and a gun in her hand that she held like she'd been born holding it. This was not the secretary he'd been watching for 8 months. This was not the kind woman who brought coffee to frightened interns and remembered security guards' names. This was what happened when you took everything gentle about a person and backed it into a corner with nothing left to lose. He reached for his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in 3 years, a number belonging to a man who owed him a debt so large it had its own gravity. Sang-wook's safe house, Taemin said into the phone. The one in the Catskills that doesn't exist on any map. I need the coordinates. A pause. Then he wrote something on the back of the photograph. Digits and letters that meant nothing to anyone except a man who had memorized every hiding place his enemies had ever built. He looked at Naya. 90 minutes north, he said. A cabin in the mountains, off-grid, 1 road in, no road out. Nia headed for the door. One more thing, Taemin said. She stopped but didn't turn. The woman who walked into my building this morning wearing a red dress, he said. The one who noticed people and remembered names and carried kindness like it cost nothing. I need you to put her somewhere safe, because where we're going, she can't survive. Nia turned her head just enough to show him her profile. The set of her jaw, the steel behind her eyes, the absence of anything soft or forgiving or kind. She's already gone, Nia said. And she walked through the door into the cold. The helicopter cut north through a sky the color of a bruise. Below, Connecticut's suburbs thinned into farmland, then forest, then the kind of darkness that existed before electricity. Vast, indifferent, absolute. The Catskill Mountains rose ahead like the spine of something ancient buried beneath the snow, their ridgelines visible only as absence, places where the stars stopped. Nia sat in the rear cabin with her bare feet pulled beneath her on the seat, her toes bloodless and blue from the frozen ground at Meadowbrook. Taemin had given her his jacket, wordlessly, without ceremony, just the weight of charcoal wool settling over her shoulders before she could refuse. She hadn't refused. The cold had eaten through the silk dress hours ago, and pride was a luxury that belonged to a woman who still had a mother sleeping safe in a hospital bed. That woman was dead. This woman was something else. She turned the photograph over in her hands. Her mother's face. Her mother's frightened eyes. Seong-jae's hand on her shoulder, like ownership, like a claim filed in flesh. On the back, the message she'd already memorized because trauma has perfect recall. Now you know what it feels like to love something he can take from you. Tell me about the cabin, she said. Taemin sat across from her, cleaning his weapon with mechanical precision. His hands moved in the dim light with the autonomy of hands that had performed this ritual 1,000 times. Magazine release, field strip, wipe, reassemble. Each movement economical, no wasted motion. The hands of a man for whom violence was not an event but a maintenance procedure. Built in 2019, he said without looking up. Originally a hunting lodge purchased through a shell company tied to Sang-wook's family. Off the grid. Generator power, well water, no landline. Single access road from the south, unpaved, 3 miles through dense forest. One structure, 2 floors. Stone foundation, timber frame. I've never been inside, but Sang-wook described it once during a planning session. His hands paused. I should have paid more attention to why he was telling me. How many men will Seong-jae have? Unknown. If he's smart, fewer rather than more. A remote location works best with a small team. 5, maybe 8, and we have 3. The secondary team is 90 minutes behind us. So we have 3. Taemin looked at her. In the darkness of the helicopter cabin, his eyes caught the instrument panel's glow and held it. 2 points of cold light in a face that had shed every pretense of civilization over the course of the day. The businessman, the CEO. The man who wore tailored suits and spoke in measured frequencies. All of it was gone. What sat across from her was the thing the suits had been designed to hide. We have 3, he confirmed. Junho's voice came through the headset. 15 minutes to the coordinates? I've mapped the access road. It dead ends at the cabin. No secondary egress visible on satellite. The tree cover is thick enough to mask thermal signatures, which means they won't see us coming, but we won't see them either. Landing zone? A clearing half a mile south of the structure. We approach on foot. In the dark, Naya said. Through half a mile of mountain forest in January. Yes. She looked down at her bare feet. Purple now. The toes had stopped hurting somewhere over the Connecticut border, which she knew from a first aid course at the community center was not a good sign. Frostbite didn't announce itself with pain. It announced itself with silence, the quiet death of cells that had given up waiting for warmth. Taemin followed her gaze. He reached beneath his seat and pulled out a pair of tactical boots. Black, heavy, clearly meant for one of his security personnel. They would be several sizes too large. They would be better than nothing the way a raft made of driftwood is better than drowning. Nia pulled them on, laced them tight. The excess space around her feet filled with the residual warmth of whoever had worn them last, and she silently thanked that unnamed person with a gratitude that felt almost violent in its intensity. The helicopter began its descent. The clearing was a wound in the forest, a patch of dead meadow ringed by skeletal oaks, snow-covered and flat and lit only by whatever light leaked from the overcast sky. The rotors kicked up white curtains as they touched down, and the silence that followed the engine shutdown was the loudest thing Nia had ever heard. Not an absence of sound, but a presence. The aggressive, watchful quiet of a landscape that knew they were there and was waiting to see what they'd do about it. They moved out. Junho took point. Taemin walked second. Naya followed, the oversized boots crunching through frozen crust with every step, the pistol in her right hand and Taemin's jacket pulled tight around her shoulders with her left. The forest swallowed them within 30 yards, dense, dark, the kind of woods where the canopy blocks the sky and the ground exists only as a suggestion beneath layers of snow and dead leaves and root systems that grab at your ankles like fingers. Nobody spoke. Communication reduced to hand signals Nia didn't understand, but followed by reading the movement of the body in front of her. When Taemin stopped, she stopped. When he moved left, she moved left. Her world contracted to the space between his shoulders, the stretch of ruined white shirt across muscle and tattoo ink, the slight hitch in his breathing that told her he was carrying an injury he hadn't mentioned. 20 minutes of walking. The cold worked its way through the jacket, through the torn silk beneath it, through skin and muscle and into bone. Nia's teeth wanted to chatter and she clenched her jaw until the molars ached, refusing to give the forest the satisfaction. Junho raised a fist. They stopped. Through the trees, a light. Warm and yellow and impossible in this wilderness. The glow of a window in a structure that materialized from the darkness like something that had been hiding. The cabin. Bigger than Nia had imagined. 2 stories of rough-hewn timber and stone, a porch running the full length of the front face, smoke curling from a chimney into the frozen air. 2 vehicles parked outside, a black SUV and a gray sedan, both recently driven based on the absence of snow on their hoods. Junho counted silently. Finger up. 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 visible signatures through the windows, shadows moving behind curtains. 1 stationary on the second floor, near a window that glowed brighter than the rest. Nia's heart knew before her brain caught up. The stationary figure, second floor. Near the light. Her mother. She started forward and Taemin's hand caught her wrist. The same grip from the rooftop, absolute and unbreakable. The physical grammar of a man who communicated through force because words were too slow. Wait, he breathed. The word was barely a sound. A vibration more than a voice. That's her. I know, and if you run to that door, you die in the first 3 seconds, and your mother dies in the next 3. So wait. His grip softened but didn't release. His thumb rested against her pulse point, and she wondered if he could feel what she felt. The hummingbird's stutter of a heart operating beyond its design specifications. Junho materialized beside them. His mouth was close to Taemin's ear. A whispered exchange in Korean that lasted 10 seconds and carried the weight of a full tactical briefing. Taemin nodded once. East side, Taemin said to Nia. There's a cellar entrance, a wooden hatch against the foundation. Junho will create a diversion at the front. I go through the cellar and up to the second floor. You stay at the tree line. No. Naya, my mother doesn't know you. She's lying in a room surrounded by men who took her from her hospital bed. If you walk through that door, she'll be terrified. If I walk through that door, she'll know she's safe. You are not trained for machine. I'm not trained for any of this. I wasn't trained for the rooftop or the elevator shaft or any single thing that's happened today. And I'm still here. He stared at her in the darkness. Snow fell between them, small flakes, scattered, catching what little light existed and carrying it downward like dying sparks. She could feel the argument building in his chest, feel the weight of every tactical objection he wanted to make, every rational reason why sending an untrained woman into a building held by armed men was the worst possible decision. She could also feel the moment he let go of every one of them. Behind me, he said. Close. When I stop, you stop. When I move, you move. Don't think. Just mirror. I know. I've been doing it for the last half mile. Something crossed his face. In the dark, she couldn't tell if it was admiration or grief. Junho peeled off toward the front of the cabin, moving through the trees with a silence that seemed to violate the physical properties of a 200-pound man wearing tactical gear. Nia lost sight of him within seconds, and the forest closed around his absence like water filling a hole. Taemin led her around the east side. They moved along the tree line, keeping the cabin at 40 yards, circling toward the stone foundation where the cellar hatch waited. The snow was deeper here, drifts that came up to her shins in the oversized boots, each step a negotiation between momentum and the sucking grip of powder snow. They reached the cellar hatch. Heavy wood, rusted hinges, a padlock that Taemin dealt with using a multi-tool from his pocket, and 17 seconds of focused pressure. The lock gave with a metallic groan that seemed to echo for miles, and they both froze, counting heartbeats, waiting for the sound to reach the cabin and come back as gunfire. Nothing. Taemin lifted the hatch. Below was darkness and the smell of damp stone and old wood. He went first, lowering himself through the opening and dropping to the cellar floor with a sound so small it was consumed by the earth itself. His hand appeared again, reaching for her. Nia took it. The cellar was low-ceilinged and cold. Rough stone walls, a dirt floor, wooden support beams running overhead like the ribs of something buried. No light, except what came from a thin gap at the base of a door at the far end. Taemin moved toward it, weapon up, his silhouette the only landmark in a landscape of absolute black. They reached the door. Taemin pressed his ear to the wood. Voices. Muffled. At least two, speaking Korean. A television playing somewhere, its cadence unmistakable. The rhythmic drone of a news broadcast providing background noise for men who were waiting. Then another sound. Higher. Thinner, coming from above. Coughing. Nia's entire body clenched. She knew that cough. Had slept beside it for months when her mother was too sick to be alone, lying in the dark, listening to the wet, tearing sound of lungs that were being consumed by something they couldn't fight. A sound that had become the soundtrack of her worst fears, playing on repeat at 3 a.m. when hope was at its lowest. She's sick, Nia whispered. She needs her medication. If they took her without her medication, Taemin's hand found her shoulder in the dark. Not a grip this time. A press. Steady. Warm. The kind of contact that says I hear you without making promises the moment can't keep. Then the front of the cabin exploded. Not literally. No detonation, no fireball, but the sound was cataclysmic. Glass shattering, wood splintering, Junho's voice bellowing something in Korean that sounded like it had been torn from the bottom of his lungs. Gunfire erupted, the sharp staccato percussion of automatic weapons, followed by the heavier, more deliberate rhythm of Junho's return fire. The cabin shook. Dust rained from the beams above them. The television died mid-sentence. Taemin kicked the cellar door open. They were in a storage room, shelves of canned goods, a workbench, tools hanging on pegboard. Through the open doorway, a kitchen. Through the kitchen, a living room where chaos was unfolding with the velocity of a car crash. Two of Seung-jae's men were at the front windows, firing into the darkness where Junho's diversion was working with terrifying effectiveness. A third had overturned a table and was screaming into a radio. None of them were looking toward the kitchen. Taemin moved through the doorway and dropped the man at the radio with a single shot. The sound was enormous in the enclosed space, a concussion that slammed Nia's eardrum shut and replaced the world with ringing. The two at the windows spun. Taemin fired twice more. One man went down. The other dove behind a couch and returned fire. And suddenly the living room was a killing box. Bullets punching through drywall, lamps exploding, fragments of wood and glass and plaster turning the air into shrapnel. Nia hit the floor. Not a conscious decision. Her body knew what her mind was still processing, and her body chose horizontal before the first bullet passed through the door frame where her head had been half a second earlier. She crawled, hands and knees across kitchen tile that was cold and gritty with tracked-in snow and spent casings that burned her palms. She made it to the stairwell, a narrow set of wooden steps climbing toward the second floor, toward the coffin, toward her mother. Behind her, Taemin and the remaining hostile were exchanging fire at close range. A conversation conducted in lead and fury, each round a syllable in an argument that could only end one way. Nia went up. The stairs groaned under her weight. Each step announced her presence to whoever waited above. She held the pistol in front of her, arms extended, the way Uncle Jerome had taught her in a backyard that now existed in a different universe. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was not. Second floor, a hallway, 3 doors. The one at the end spilling light through a gap at the bottom. She moved toward it. A man stepped out of the second door, young, wiry, holding a handgun with the casual familiarity of someone who had held one before but never pointed it at a woman in a red dress climbing his stairs at midnight. His eyes went wide. His weapon came up. Nia didn't think. She threw herself sideways into the wall as the gun went off. The report so close she felt the heat of the muzzle blast on her cheek. The bullet punched into the ceiling above her head and rained plaster into her hair. She hit the floor, rolled, and fired twice from the ground the way no training manual had ever taught anyone to fire, because training manuals were written in rooms with good lighting and no one trying to kill you. The first shot hit the doorframe. The second caught him in the thigh. He screamed and dropped, his weapon clattering down the hallway, and Nia was past him before he stopped sliding, stepping over his legs, kicking his gun behind her, not looking back. The door at the end of the hall. She kicked it open, and there was her mother. Gloria Holloway sat upright in a wooden chair, wrapped in a hospital blanket, her face gray with exhaustion and illness and fear. An IV port was still taped to the back of her hand, the tube dangling disconnected, a bruise spreading around the insertion point in the sickly yellow-green of blood that had nowhere to go. Her eyes, those eyes that Nia had known since before she knew her own name, were open and terrified and wet and alive. Alive. "Baby," Gloria whispered. Nia crossed the room and dropped to her knees in front of the chair and pressed her face into her mother's lap and felt hands, thin, trembling, weak from chemo but still her mother's hands, settle on her head with a tenderness that broke something inside her that she'd been holding together with pure will since 6 o'clock that morning. "I'm here, Mama. I'm here. They took me from the hospital, men with guns. They put me in a car and I didn't—" Gloria's voice broke. The coughing started again, and Nia felt each spasm in her mother's body like an earthquake in her own. "Don't talk. Save your breath. I'm going to get you out of here." Nia, the man, the one in charge. He said, I don't care what he said. He said he'd let me go if the other man came alone. The Korean man. Your boss. Nia went still. Her face was still pressed against her mother's knees, her hands still gripping the fabric of the hospital blanket, but everything inside her had gone motionless. The absolute crystalline stillness of a mind assembling a picture it doesn't want to see. Seung-jae didn't take her mother to draw Nia out. He took her mother to draw Tae-min out. And Nia, by coming here, by insisting on being in the helicopter, by refusing to stay behind, had done exactly what Seung-jae wanted. She had brought Tae-min directly to the kill zone. Downstairs, the gunfire stopped. The silence that replaced it was worse than any bullet. It was the silence of an outcome already decided, a chess move already completed, a trap already sprung. Then a voice from the base of the stairs. Calm. Unhurried. Speaking English with the careful precision of a man who wanted to make sure every word landed exactly where it was aimed. Miss Holloway. She knew the voice. She'd never heard it before tonight, but she knew it the way you know the sound of a storm that's been heading toward you since morning. Park Seong-jae. Your employer is bleeding on my living room floor, he said. He's not dead yet, but that's a temporary condition. Come downstairs. Bring the weapon. Place it on the bottom step, and we'll have the conversation that tonight was always about. Nia lifted her face from her mother's lap. Gloria was staring at her daughter, at the torn red dress and the grease-stained skin, and the gun in her hand and the person wearing all of it, a person she had raised, had fed, had clothed, had loved with everything a body ravaged by cancer had left to give. And the expression on Gloria's face was not fear, it was recognition. The recognition of a mother seeing, for the first time, the full architecture of the woman her daughter had become. "Don't go down there," Gloria whispered. Nia stood. She checked the magazine. 4 rounds remaining. "Stay in this room," she said. "Don't open the door for anyone except me." "Naya." "Anyone except me, Mama." She kissed her mother's forehead, tasted salt and hospital antiseptic and the faint chemical residue of chemotherapy. Tasted the woman who had bought her a red silk dress for her 23rd birthday because she believed her daughter deserved to feel beautiful. Then she turned and walked into the hallway with the gun at her side, and behind her the door closed, and below her a monster waited beside the body of a man who had admitted in the ruins of his own office that she reminded him what humanity looked like. 4 rounds. 1 monster. And a woman in red descending toward both. The stairs complained under each step. Old wood, dry wood, the kind that remembers every weight it has ever carried and announces each new one like a warning. Nia descended with the pistol at her side, the barrel pointed at the floor, her finger outside the trigger guard the way Uncle Jerome had drilled into her a lifetime ago in a backyard that existed on a different planet. 4 rounds. She kept the number in front of everything else, a simple fact to hold on to while the rest of the world came apart. The living room opened before her like a wound. Furniture overturned, walls pockmarked with bullet holes. The television lay face down on the floor, its screen cracked into a spiderweb of dead glass. Shell casings littered the hardwood like brass seeds waiting to grow into something worse. The air tasted like gunpowder and copper and the sour chemical bite of drywall dust. Timin lay on the floor near the overturned couch. His back was against the wall, his legs extended in front of him, his right hand pressed against his left side where blood, dark, steady, too much of it, seeped between his fingers and pooled on the wood beneath him. His weapon lay 3 feet from his reach, kicked there by someone who understood that distance was the difference between a dying man and a dangerous one. His eyes were open. When they found Nia on the stairs, something moved through them. Not relief, not fear, but something private and enormous that she didn't have time to translate. Park Seong-jae stood at the center of the room. He was smaller than she'd imagined. The man who had consumed this entire day with his hatred, who had mobilized kill teams and driven armored vehicles through lobbies and kidnapped a cancer patient from her hospital bed. This man was 5'8", thin, with the narrow shoulders of someone who had never relied on his body to do what his mind could accomplish at a distance. His face was unremarkable, angular, the kind of face you'd pass on the street without memory. But his eyes were wrong. Something had gone out of them years ago, and what remained was a luminosity that had nothing to do with light, the flat, patient shine of a man who had replaced every human impulse with a single, consuming purpose. He held no weapon. His hands hung at his sides, empty, relaxed. 3 of his men stood at the perimeter of the room, one near the kitchen doorway, one near the front windows, one at the base of the stairs behind Nia. She felt the 3rd man's presence at her back, like a hand pressed between her shoulder blades. "Place the weapon on the step," Seong-jae said. His English was accented but precise. Each word landed with the careful weight of something rehearsed, not because he didn't speak the language well, but because he wanted her to understand that this moment had been scripted long before she arrived. Nia didn't place the weapon. She held it at her side and stepped off the last stair onto the living room floor, glass crunching under the borrowed boots. "My mother needs her medication," she said. "Whatever you want from tonight, it starts with that." Seong-jae tilted his head. The gesture was almost gentle, curious, as if she'd said something unexpected in a conversation he'd been having alone for years. "You have your mother's spine," he said. "Gloria Holloway, born in Memphis, moved to Brooklyn at 19, worked 3 jobs to raise 2 children after your father left. diagnosed with stage 3 non-small cell lung cancer 14 months ago. He recited the facts without inflection, without emotion, the way you'd read a file you'd memorized so thoroughly the words had lost their meaning. I know everything about your family, Miss Holloway. I have known for months, and I want you to understand that none of this was ever about you. Then let her go. When the conversation is finished. What conversation? Sung-jae looked at Tae-min. The look carried 15 years of compressed history, 15 years of exile, of planning, of watching from the margins while the man who had taken everything from him built an empire on the wreckage. Hatred this old doesn't burn anymore. It calcifies. It becomes architecture. It becomes the bones of the building you live in, so fundamental to your structure that removing it would mean collapse. In 2011, Seung-jae said, still looking at Tae-min, I was the most trusted lieutenant in the Kong organization. Your father valued my counsel. My loyalty was proven through a decade of service. Then his son, 23 years old, arrogant, hungry, decided the old structures were too slow. He orchestrated a coup. He took his father's seat, and he destroyed everyone who had helped build what he inherited. You tried to kill me, Tae-min said from the floor. His voice was thin, stripped of its usual frequency by pain and blood loss, but the words were steady. You and 4 others, in my father's own house while he slept. I tried to preserve what your father built. You tried to take it, and you responded by burning my life to ash. Seung-jae's voice didn't rise, it deepened. My wife left the country with my daughter because you made it impossible for them to stay. My business interests were seized. My allies were absorbed or eliminated. Everything I had spent 20 years building was dismantled in a single week by a boy who mistook ruthlessness for strength. The room held its breath. Even the men at the perimeter seemed to recede, their bodies present, but their attention pulled inward by the gravity of what was happening at the center. So yes, Seung-jae continued, I watched, I waited. I found the cracks in your perfect empire, Sang-wook, who you trusted because you trained him, who came to me because you never once asked him what he wanted. And I watched you make the one mistake that men like us are never supposed to make. He looked at Naya. You fell in love with someone kind. The words hit Tae-min harder than the bullet in his side. Nia saw it, saw the flinch he couldn't suppress, saw the admission that lived in the flinch, saw 15 years of carefully constructed emotional architecture crack along a fault line he hadn't known existed. You think I don't understand? Seung-jae said. You think I can't see it? Every report Sang-wook sent me. The way you restructured her employment, the way you routed her mother's medical bills through a trust no auditor would ever question, the way you positioned guards around her family without her knowledge. These are not the actions of an employer. These are the actions of a man who has found the one thing he can't buy, can't threaten, can't control. And it terrifies him. Enough, Nia said. Both men looked at her. The word had come out with an authority she hadn't consciously summoned. The authority of a woman who had spent the entire day being discussed, targeted, protected, endangered, and spoken about in the third person, and who had reached the absolute limit of her tolerance for being the object in someone else's sentence. You lost your family, she said to Seung-jae. I understand that. You lost everything, and you spent 15 years turning that loss into a reason to breathe. But my mother is upstairs coughing blood into her hands because you ripped her out of a hospital bed to make a point, and no amount of history between you and him justifies that. Seung-jae studied her. The flat luminosity of his eyes shifted. A recalculation, a reappraisal of a variable he had underestimated. Your mother was never in danger from me, he said. She was leverage. She was the string I pulled to bring him here. To this room. To this floor. Where I could look into his eyes and see whether the boy who destroyed my life has ever once understood what he took from me. And now you've seen it, Nia said. Now what? The question hung in the destroyed living room like smoke. Seung-jae's eyes moved from Nia to Tae-min and stayed there. The man on the floor stared back, his hand still pressed to his bleeding side, his face the color of wet cement, his eyes holding something that Naya recognized because she'd seen it earlier that day in the office, when he'd stood at his window and told her she reminded him of humanity. Regret. Not the performative kind. Not the strategic admission of a man looking for advantage. The deep, structural kind. The kind that sits in the foundation of a life and weakens every wall built on top of it. She's right, Taemin said. His voice was fading. The blood was doing what blood does when there's too much of it outside the body. It was taking the volume with it, draining the frequency from his words until they were barely above a whisper. You lost your family because of my ambition. I won't call it anything else. I was 23 and I wanted power and I took it, and I didn't count the cost because powerful men don't count costs. They pass them on to everyone around them. He coughed. Blood appeared at the corner of his mouth, a thin line that tracked down his chin and dripped onto his ruined shirt. Sang-wook came to you because I never saw him as a person. He was a function, a tool I maintained. I trained him the way I was trained, through discipline and expectation and the systematic elimination of any impulse that didn't serve the organization. And when he needed something I couldn't provide, loyalty that went both directions, you were there. Sung-jae's expression didn't change, but his hands, which had been hanging loose at his sides, slowly closed into fists. Not aggression, something closer to the opposite. The desperate grip of a man holding on to the shape of his own hatred while the foundation beneath it shifted. You think words change what you did? Sung-jae said. No. You think admitting it makes it less true? No. Then what are you doing? Taemin looked at Nia, looked at her the way drowning men look at the surface, with the full knowledge that the distance might be too far and the full intention of swimming anyway. I'm telling you what she taught me, he said, that the world I built isn't the only one that exists, that there are people who remember names and bring soup to janitors and give their phone number to strangers because the strangers' hands were shaking, and that those people don't deserve to be standing in rooms like this, holding weapons they should never have had to touch, paying for wars they didn't start. Silence. The man near the kitchen shifted his weight. The man at the windows adjusted his grip on his weapon. Small movements, the micro-adjustments of men reading the room and trying to determine which direction the next 30 seconds would break. Let them go, Taemin said. The woman upstairs and the woman in this room, they're not part of this. They were never part of this. This is between you and me, and it always has been. Sung-jae's fists tightened. His jaw worked. Behind his eyes, something was happening. A war between calcified purpose and the living, breathing inconvenience of a truth he hadn't expected to hear. Nia watched it the way you watch a building decide whether to stand or fall after the earthquake has passed. Your men took my wife's phone number from our daughter's school records, Seong-jae said quietly. Did you know that? They called her at 3 a.m. and told her to leave the country or they'd find her daughter at recess. My daughter was 9 years old. Taemin closed his eyes. I didn't know that. No, because you gave the orders and let other people carry the weight. Yes, and now a woman you care about is standing in my house holding a gun because the weight finally reached you. Yes. Seong-jae unclenched his fists. The movement was slow, deliberate, each finger extending as if releasing something it had held for so long the muscles had forgotten any other shape. He looked at Nia. Go upstairs, he said. Get your mother. Walk out the front door. Nia didn't move. And him? This isn't your decision. He's bleeding out on your floor. If I leave him here, then you lose someone who matters to you. The way I lost everyone who mattered to me. Seong-jae's voice was colorless, flat, the voice of a man stating a mathematical equation. That was always the point. Nia raised the pistol. The room crystallized. 3 weapons swung toward her from the perimeter. 3 men whose job was to protect the man she was pointing a gun at. 3 fingers finding 3 triggers with the mechanical certainty of a countdown. Nia, Taemin said from the floor. Don't. Shut up. Put the gun down. I said shut up. She kept the weapon trained on Seong-jae. Her arms were steady. Her voice was steady. Everything about her was steady because the shaking had stopped sometime on the second-floor hallway, and what replaced it was a stillness she hadn't known she possessed. You want to kill him? You've been planning it for 15 years? You've earned it. Maybe he deserves it. I don't know. I've known him for 8 months, and most of that time he was just a signature on my paycheck. She took a step forward. The men at the perimeter tensed but didn't fire. Something about her, about the torn red dress and the bare-knuckled grip and the voice that came from a place none of them could reach, held them in suspension. But you said you lost your family because of what he did. You said your wife ran. Your daughter grew up without a father. That's real. That's a wound nobody can fix. She held his eyes. So what does your daughter think you're doing right now? Does she know? Does she know her father became the exact thing that destroyed her childhood? Does she know you kidnapped a sick woman from a hospital bed and held her in a cabin in the mountains to bait a man into dying? Sungjae's face changed. The flat luminosity flickered, a power surge in a system running on fumes, and behind it, Nia saw something she recognized from her own mirror. Exhaustion. The bone-deep, soul-deep exhaustion of a person who has been running on fury for so long they've forgotten what the fuel was supposed to be for. If you kill him, Nia said, you become the story your daughter tells herself about why her father was never there. You become the reason. Not him. You. The room balanced on the edge of a blade. Seongjae's eyes were wet. Not tears. Something before tears. The pressure that builds behind the dam before the dam makes its decision. Then a sound from upstairs. Coughing. Gloria Holloway, alone in a room in a cabin in the mountains, coughing the way she coughed at 3 a.m. when the chemo was at its worst, and the only comfort was her daughter's hand on her back. Seongjae closed his eyes. When he opened them, the luminosity was gone. What remained was something dimmer, older, more human. The face of a man standing in the wreckage of his own obsession and seeing, for the first time, the actual dimensions of what it had cost him. He said something in Korean, a single word directed at his men. They lowered their weapons, not quickly, not willingly, but they lowered them. But Sungjae looked at Tae-min one last time. 15 years of history passing between them in a silence that was louder than everything that had come before. I'll disappear, Sungjae said. Tonight, you won't find me, and I won't look for you. He paused. But you carry what you did. You carry it every day for the rest of your life. That's the price. Tae-min nodded, a single movement that cost him something Nia could see, a payment made in the currency of a pride that had once been worth killing for. Seongjae walked to the front door. His men followed. The door opened. Cold air flooded in, carrying snow and darkness and the smell of mountain forest. He stepped through without looking back, and the door closed behind him, and the cabin was quiet. Nia dropped the pistol and ran to Tae-min. His face was gray. His breathing was shallow, the thin, rapid respiration of a body trying to maintain consciousness on a budget that was running out. The blood beneath him had spread into a pool that reflected the overhead light like dark glass. She pressed her hands against the wound. His blood was warm, hot even, against her cold fingers. She pressed harder and felt the wet give of damaged tissue beneath muscle, felt his body flinch and then accept the pressure with the resignation of a man who had run out of alternatives. Stay awake, she said. Junho's team is coming, 20 minutes. 17, he said. His mouth barely moved. I was counting. Then count out loud, keep talking. About what? Anything. Tell me something I don't know about you. A pause. Each breath was a negotiation, his chest rising, falling, the rhythm slower than it should have been. I play piano, he said. Chopin. Badly. In an apartment nobody knows about in Hell's Kitchen. A cough. More blood at the corner of his mouth. I go there on Sunday mornings when the building is quiet, and I play the same 3 pieces I learned when I was 12, before my father decided music was weakness. What pieces? You wouldn't know them. Try me. Nocturne in E-flat, Ballade No. 1, and a waltz, the one in C-sharp minor, the sad one. They're all sad. He almost smiled. Almost. His lips moved in the direction of a smile, and the muscles gave out halfway, and what remained was something more honest than a smile, the raw sketch of an emotion that had never been given permission to finish. Yeah, he said, they're all sad. Nia heard it then, the distant percussion of helicopter rotors, Junho's secondary team closing the distance that stood between Tae-min and survival. She pressed harder on the wound. His blood seeped between her fingers, warm and insistent, and she held on with everything she had because holding on was the only thing she'd ever really known how to do. The red dress, he said, his voice barely above a breath. Don't throw it away. It's ruined. It was never about the dress. The helicopters arrived. Men flooded the cabin with medical equipment and urgency, and the organized chaos of professionals trained to pull people back from the edge. Nia was moved aside, gently, firmly, by hands that knew she wouldn't let go willingly. She stood against the wall and watched them work on him, watched them cut open his shirt and pack the wound and start an IV with the methodical speed of people for whom minutes were a unit of survival. She went upstairs. Her mother was sitting exactly where she'd left her, hands folded in her lap, eyes on the door. When Nia walked in, Gloria Holloway opened her arms, and Nia fell into them the way she hadn't fallen since she was a child, completely, without reservation, without the armor she'd spent 25 years constructing against a world that took things from you whenever it felt like it. They sat together in that room while the cabin emptied below them. Mother and daughter, the woman who had bought the red dress, and the woman who had worn it into a war. "You're going to be okay, Mama." "I know, baby. I know." 3 months later. Chicago in April was a con artist. Blue sky and warm breeze at noon, 40 degrees, and horizontal rain by sunset. Nia Holloway had learned to carry a jacket everywhere, the way she'd learned to carry everything in her new life. With preparation, with awareness, with the quiet vigilance of a woman who had been taught by one terrible day that safety was a practice, not a destination. She worked for a medical research company in the West Loop. Legitimate. Verified. The kind of organization where the guards at the front desk carried radios instead of weapons, and the biggest threat in the building was a passive-aggressive email chain about refrigerator etiquette. The job paid well, not Hanul Group well, but well enough to cover the apartment in Lincoln Park and her mother's ongoing treatments at Northwestern Memorial, and Darius's tuition at a school where the worst thing that happened was someone stealing your parking spot. Gloria Holloway was in remission. Not cured. The doctors were careful with that word, parceling out hope in measured doses the way they parceled out the treatment itself. But the latest scans were clear. The cough was quieter. She walked to the park on good days and sat on a bench near the lake and watched the water move and breathed air that didn't smell like hospitals or gunpowder or mountain forests in January. Darius was 17 and angry in the way 17-year-olds are supposed to be angry, at teachers, at curfews, at a world that moved too slowly for his ambitions. He never asked about what happened in January. Nia never told him. The men who had collected him from school had delivered him to a hotel in Midtown with a PlayStation and unlimited room service, and to a 17-year-old boy that was an adventure, not a trauma. She intended to keep it that way for as long as the universe allowed. Minjun texted her once a month, short messages, photos of bakery items with captions like, "Yuna says hi," and "She made red velvet today, thought of you." He'd been promoted. His shoulder healed with a scar he wore like a medal, and sometimes when Nia looked at those texts, she felt something warm and sharp in her chest, pride or gratitude, or the particular ache that comes from knowing someone risked their life for yours and came out the other side still capable of joy. She didn't hear from Tae Min. She didn't expect to. The night at the cabin had been an ending, not a beginning. She understood that. He understood that. Whatever had grown between them in the space of one catastrophic day, whatever lived in the gap between "you remind me what humanity looks like" and the piano confession on a blood-soaked floor, it existed in a room that neither of them could enter again. Because entering that room meant entering his world, and his world had nearly killed her mother and nearly killed her, and had absolutely killed the version of herself that had walked into the Hanuel building that morning believing a red dress could make a bad day better. One rainy evening in late April, her phone buzzed. She was sitting on her couch with a bowl of pasta she'd overcooked and a documentary about deep-sea creatures that she was watching. For no reason other than deep-sea creatures had no connection to anything in her life. And that was the point. The rain was hitting the windows in irregular rhythms. The apartment smelled like garlic and the candle Darius had bought her for her birthday. Sandalwood, too sweet, but he'd chosen it himself, and that made it perfect. Unknown number. A text message. "You were right. There was another way." No name, no signature, no context for anyone else in the world. But she knew. She knew the way you know your own heartbeat. Not because you've memorized it, but because it lives inside you. She stared at the message for a long time. The rain kept hitting the windows. The documentary showed a creature made entirely of light, drifting through absolute darkness, beautiful and impossible and utterly alone. She typed 2 words, "Stay alive." Then she deleted the message. Not because she wanted to forget, because some things are safer when they exist only in the space between 2 people, unrecorded, undocumented, held in the private architecture of memory where no surveillance photograph can reach them. She put the phone on the coffee table and pulled a blanket over her legs and watched the luminous creature drift through the deep. Her pasta was cold. The candle was burning low. The rain was the only sound in a world that, for the first time in months, felt exactly the right size. Deep in the closet of her Lincoln Park apartment, behind the blazers she wore to work, and the cardigan she'd carried over from her old life like a relic, the red dress hung in darkness. It was torn at the hem, grease-stained at the shoulders. One sleeve had a cut from a piece of glass she didn't remember encountering. The silk was no longer smooth. It had been through things that silk was never designed to survive, and it showed. Every wrinkle, every stain, every small violence the fabric had absorbed was written on its surface like a language only she could read. She never wore it again. She never threw it away, because that dress had walked into a building and started a war. It had climbed an elevator shaft and crossed a rooftop and run barefoot through January snow. It had stood between a mother and the men who took her. It had faced down a man consumed by 15 years of hatred and reminded him that the thing he was becoming was worse than the thing he was fighting. It had almost gotten her killed, and somehow, in the strange, brutal arithmetic of a world where kindness is both a vulnerability and the only thing worth protecting, it had saved them all. Nia Holloway finished her pasta, turned off the documentary, blew out the candle, and went to bed in a quiet apartment in a quiet city in a life she had earned with every scar she carried and every choice she'd made in the space of one impossible day. Outside, the rain slowed, the clouds thinned, and somewhere, in a Hell's Kitchen apartment nobody knew about, on a Sunday morning not yet arrived, a piano sat waiting in the silence for hands that were learning, slowly and badly and with great difficulty, to build something that didn't require destroying anything else. The keys were cold, but the music, when it came, was warm.